Hi, Dave. Thank you for coming on the podcast. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing really well. Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. Yeah, yeah. Well, you've done a lot in your life, DJing, author, journalism. You even did a bit of teaching. But are we okay to go back to the start? You were born
Yeah,
in.
we can talk about anything you like.
Thank you. Yeah, you were born in Birmingham. Obviously before you moved to Manchester. What was your childhood like there?
Yeah, my childhood was, from what I remember, uh, pretty good. I mean, a couple of things stand out. One of which is that there were three of us kids, and but we were joined by numerous foster brothers and sisters. My parents fostered, so I think from when I was about seven until I was about 12, 13. There was, I think, altogether, probably 30 or 35 foster children, some of them for a couple of days, some of them for a couple of months. So it was, I mean, looking back on it, it was a very formative experience to have these kids, some of whom were from pretty horrific backgrounds. I mean, I didn't know, I wasn't kind of party to all the details, but thinking back in retrospect, a lot of them were coming from, yeah, backgrounds where there was a lot of abuse, or a parent was in jail, or all kinds of stuff. Um, and I think that stayed with me because it's given me a pretty broad outlook on life. Um, quite a, obviously, I've inherited probably from my parents a kind of a tolerance for people, or even a kind of enthusiasm for people. And just it's fantastic when you're that age and a couple of kids come into your home for the first time, and you just embrace them as your brothers and sisters. You
Yeah.
don't ask the question. It's not like you're wary of them. You're not like, well, who are you? And there were Irish kids, Afro-Caribbean, you know, whoever they were, as far as I was concerned, there was like someone to hang out with and get to know and play football with. And I'd like to think that as a person, I still have that openness to people of from all kinds of backgrounds. So that stands out. And the other thing I think was, I mean, I grew up in the 70s. I mean, I was 8 when the 70s started, 18 when the 70s ended. So I'm a kind of I lived through a pretty amazing music decade. And I had an elder sister who was about 3 years older than me. Well, I still have, but she used to kind of let me hang out with her and her mates at the youth club. So they didn't have great music taste, a lot of her friends, but at least they were all passionate about music and
Yeah.
were used to watch Top of the Pops. And so music was a kind of a big part of us. All three of us kids grew up loving music. I don't think our parents were that interested. My mum might have been. My dad doesn't really have a passion for music, but we all did. And and I used to like watching Top of the Pops and seeing uh, Rose Royce or the Drifters or these kind of American soul bands, and then Blondie and Buzzcocks and all that. So I had a very good music education in a way, uh, during my teen years.
You've mentioned you're a big fan of music and obviously you're a big fan of books and writing as well. Did all that come to you at once or were it different times?
Oh, it's hard to know. I mean, I think quite like a lot of people. I mean, I enjoyed school. I enjoyed kind of learning, history and reading books and those kind of subjects. But I think a lot of people get to a point, I don't know when it would be, when you're 10, 11, 12, and you start to get aware that there's a world out there beyond either what you're learning at school or what's given to you on TV. And so you begin to explore. That's what I did. I was a kind of a curious kid, and I would explore all kinds of different music and books, because maybe I kind of felt like they were the key to something else, experiences that went beyond the everyday mundanity, and certainly beyond the everyday mainstream culture that we kind of all grow up in because it's so dominant. And I think there's still kids of that age now who sit in on a Saturday night and watch light entertainment on TV and are just sitting there thinking there's got to be more to life than this. And I was one of those kids, and back then it was things like It Ain't Half Hot, Mum, and really, dreadful stuff, and now it's, whatever it is, Strictly or whatever, although I believe that's all right. Anyway, whatever it is, I kind of, I think that you get to an age and you're like, you just want to go out and you just want a different experience. And for me, books and music just went hand in hand, I think, because they're both about ideas. I didn't think, oh, I'm a music fan. Oh, I'm a fan of books, or I love film. For me, I was hungry for ideas. I was hungry for all kinds of artistic, creative stuff, because I just wanted to learn as much as I could about the world, really, and being a human being. And some of that I found in books, and some of it I found in music. And then you find, as you get a bit older, 14, 15 maybe, that music is also a social thing. So at the youth club, I remember I was at a different youth club to my sister at this point. I was about 15, one in Balsall Heath in Birmingham, where UB40 and came from, very multiracial part of Birmingham. I lived in Moseley, which was like the adjoining neighbourhood. But I was in a youth club in Balsall Heath, and we all went to watch Car Wash, the film, when it came out at youth club. And then there'd be the youth club disco, and there'd be parties at school and all those sort of things. And you realise, that music isn't just like a private passion, but you can meet people who are into the same stuff as you, or you can meet people who turn you on to good stuff, and you just learn. And I hoovered it all up. I was never somebody who, still, I'm not somebody who has a concrete idea of what I like, which is written in stone, and I won't let anything else come into my life. For me, I was always, I wonder what next. I wonder what remains to be discovered.
Yeah.
And so I was very much like that, I think, as a teen.
Well, we mentioned that you moved to Manchester in 1980. You moved there to go to university. Was that personally a big step for you?
Not really, because although I think football fans and others consider where they grew up as being, special, which in some ways it is, but look upon other cities as being rivals or completely different, Manchester, Liverpool, Blackburn, Burnley. It's like all those rivalries are created, I think in some ways they're created artificially, because to me, Birmingham and Manchester, or Liverpool, or Leeds, all those places were pretty similar in 1980, and I don't think they're madly different now, really. So for me, it was going from one post-industrial disaster zone to another, So the music scene in Birmingham, when I left, there were bands around like the Prefects, who actually were big allies of the Factory Records stuff, the Au Pairs, Steel Pulse, who were brilliant, Dexys Midnight Runners, who I saw 3 or 4 times in their first couple of years, UB40, you were mentioned, and then there was the kind of beginnings of the scene that Duran Duran came out of. So there was lots of stuff in Birmingham, but then when I got to Manchester, obviously I knew from being a John Peel listener that what I would find in Manchester was The Fall and Buzzcocks and the Factory Record stuff. And I was a big fan of Joy Division. And I saw them play 3 times when I was in sixth form. So I knew I was coming to a very, very similar city, but one that did definitely have a very exciting music scene. And I think I based my choice of where I wanted to study pretty much based, on what I thought the music scene was going to be like when I arrived in 1980. I mean, the funny thing was that I had kind of put all these people, Marquis Smith, Pete Shelley, New Order, I put them on such a pedestal before I arrived in the city. I'd buy the NME and I'd buy the records and I'd listen to John Peel and I'd tape all the sessions. And it wasn't until I arrived in Manchester that I realized that actually that scene, which is so mythical now, was quite small in the context of the city. It
Yeah.
was underground, and I thought I'd arrive and, Marquis Smith would be like, carried through the streets of, like the Pope or something. And he was just another guy in the corner of the pub. I remember seeing Pete Shelley in a bookshop, and I was like, wow. For me, it was star spotting. It'd be like the equivalent of seeing, Taylor Swift in Quick Save, and I was like, Pete Shelley, and can I talk to him? Should I talk to him? What's he reading? And the vast majority of people in Manchester were not interested really in that scene at all, and I think that's kind of quite an important thing to remember, that often it is things that are on the periphery of culture that will, in due course, become the center of culture. That the interesting stuff does happen away from the mainstream and the general gaze of the general public, and that was a useful lesson to learn. Really, I mean, I remember a few years later, I was started to get involved in putting on bands and DJing, 1984, 5 probably, maybe later. And the number 11 bus through Moss Side, which is now the 111, that went past Main Road, and Status Quo were playing. And there were like hundreds of bedemined Status Quo fans queuing up to go and see Status Quo. And I was on the bus, and I was going to the Man Alive, which was a tiny little club near where MMU is now. I don't know who I was going to see or what I was involved with, but I knew there wouldn't be more than about 50 or 60 people there. But I was happy with my life choice. I was happy with that,
Yeah.
and I was like, well, my world is this ridiculous, obscure little club with these bands no one's heard of. And I was quite happy and excited to be part of that world. That was kind of quite early on. And again, it was a reaffirmation of that idea that interesting stuff you have to really go out of your way to find.
Well, you said that scene with Joy Division and The Fall wasn't a big scene at the time. Why do you think it's looked back on as a big scene? Like, do you think it's because of what happened after in Manchester, or do you think the music stood the test of time?
Well, both, but I think definitely the music stood the test of time. The um, I mean, the music is fantastic, and and it's the interesting thing was it wasn't really hyped. The idea that, I mean, Joy Division, obviously, they're just like a massive name now, known right around the world, and like a million
Yeah.
T-shirts. Um, you know, I remember seeing them in 1979 at the Apollo in Manchester, supporting Buzzcocks, and the Apollo was full, but actually Joy Division was a support band, and I remember I was a big fan, and I was kind of annoyed because I think it was the room for them was probably a third full. Everyone else was in the bar, you know, like they do at gigs.
Yeah, yeah.
So even though like Joy Division were there, and this was what 3 or 4 months after Unknown Pleasures had come out, um, you know, even a switched on Buzzcocks crowd weren't that interested in the main in Joy Division. But because those things are out in the periphery and they're underground and they're underfinanced and they're independent and they're not part of the big commercial world, they take a while to percolate through the culture. You know, and in the same way, the Velvet Underground and the Stooges, those kind of groups, you know, it took years for people to hear the records, appreciate the music, understand the context they were working in, and it was the same really with the Fall and Joy Division and Buzzcocks and all that stuff. Um, because it's not accessible at the time, and it's maybe a bit way out at the time, and then the more people hear the record, then the more people will be converted. But as you say, it's also the story, you know, the story of how it became a kind of virtuous circle where all that activity at the end of the 70s led to more activity, led to the Smiths, led to the Hacienda, led to the Manchester years, and on we go. And that's great, because that all that momentum that was generated at the end of the 70s and the early 80s, you know, that's really changed the city. And it's created like 100 mythologies and, you know, but dozens of good bands and clubs. So yeah, it's a mixture, I think.
Yeah. You was at Joy Division's last ever gig. Obviously, nobody knew it was going to be the last gig, but what was that gig like?
Um, yeah, I mean, I was at the last Joy Division gig and the last night of the Hacienda, so don't invite me to your party, you know. Um, I Joy Division I loved anyway. Um, the What I remember about the gig was that Ian Curtis did seem ill. I think he left the stage a couple of times, and there were lots of rumors about cancelled gigs and stuff. And I also remember that the support band, A Certain Ratio, they were fantastic.
Yeah.
And I know it sounds kind of bad now, but I was already a Joy Division fan, and I kind of knew Unknown Pleasures inside out, and I loved at that final gig getting to hear stuff from the Closer album.
Mm.
But A Certain Ratio were an absolute revelation, because I'd had seen them actually play once before, 6 months earlier, but seeing them that night, I was like, whoa, this is another amazing band, you know. And I went out the next day and got their cassette album that they'd released. I mean, and also looking back on it, there were 400 people there, 300, 400 people. I mean, the room was full, but it, you know, it was a school night. So, you know, I had to get the bus home as soon as the gig had finished. Remember that as well, that kind of panic and anxiety that you had when you were young, and your parents were kind of expecting you to, you know, get home in a reasonable hour and in a reasonable state to go to school the next day. So yeah, I was kind of I remember thinking during the encore, I think it was an encore, but they did a long version of Velvet Underground's song. I remember looking at my watch and thinking, if this goes on much longer, I'm going to miss the number one bus back home.
But where was you when you heard about Ian Curtis's death?
I was listening to John Peel.
Oh, he announced it, didn't he? Yeah.
Yeah, he announced it on the Monday. So, I mean, obviously, it happened late Saturday night or early Sunday morning, or whatever. And he knew and announced it on the Monday night. And I mean, it's hard for people of a younger age who have grown up with instant communication and social media, but that was quite um, it's surprising that people generally heard so soon after it had happened. But I think, if I'm right, that the NME wasn't being published at that point because there was a strike, and so there was a little bit of an information vacuum about what exactly had happened. You know,
Yeah.
um, so the few of us who were Joy Division fans at school were like, you know, desperately trying to work out what was going on. It was obviously big news.
Yeah. Were you surprised
Now,
that
I
you?
mean, big news in our world, but
Yeah.
uh, and and then it was just a few months later that I came to Manchester.
Mm.
And I think within a month of being in Manchester, um, I saw New Order, because obviously they got, I think the way that New Order grew out of the ashes of Joy Division is just such an incredible story, really.
Yeah. Yeah. I was gonna say, were you surprised that New Order carried on?
Um, well, I don't know. I mean, I was only 18. I didn't really know that much about the world, not as much as I thought I did. So I don't think I was able to analyze it so much at the time. I mean, looking back and having got to know the band pretty well and interviewed them all countless times and spent time with them, um, it's made me, appreciate um, how, that kind of renaissance and that remaking of the band, uh, uh, it's incredible. Um, and when I saw them play, they were literally starting from scratch. They were at a small venue called the Squat on Oxford Road, and it was Gillian's first gig. And I think all three of the lads had a go at singing because at that point they hadn't decided who was going to be the singer. I mean, some of the songs suited Hooky. Stephen looked quite uncomfortable playing the drums and singing like Phil Collins or somebody. It didn't really work for him. So it kind of, and I remember Bernard falling over. I think he'd had a few too many Pernos. So, but it was like watching a brand new band, and obviously they had new songs. They decided not to play. I mean, apart from Ceremony, which they had rehearsed and they had played with Joy Division, because it was one of Ian's songs. Apart from that, I don't recall them playing any Joy Division. Um, so not until In a Lonely Place, I guess. And I don't think it was till about mid '90s that I heard New Order play Love Will Tear Us Apart.
Oh,
So it was all
really?
new stuff.
Yeah.
They were starting again. They weren't, they had no singer, half an hour's worth of material. They had a synthesizer or two that they didn't seem to know how to work. And they had an audience of like 80. Um, and from that, it just obviously just grew and grew and grew.
You mentioned that you're going to a lot of gigs at this time. What's the best gig you've ever been to?
Oh wow, you should have emailed this one in advance. Um, I don't know. I think probably Sonic Youth, probably one of my favorite bands. I was lucky enough to see them play in relatively small venues in the mid '80s. I think most bands that I like are better suited to small venues.
Yeah.
Um, and there's nothing better than, you know, seeing a band in a venue where you can see the sweat dripping off the singer's head, you know, and you can kind of, you know, you can hear a little bit of on stage banter between the singer and the guitarist, or the guitarist and the drummer, and it's very intimate, and the band are very relatively, you know, hungry. You know, they're not kind of complacent. They haven't been, you know, on the road for years. So I think all my favorite gigs have been small venues. Um, and I think probably, yeah, one of the Sonic Youth gigs I probably that I saw. Um, uh, but you know, I still get a big buzz from going to go to see bands. I saw a band called Heartworms
All
play
right.
over the summer, and I mean the band are all definitely, they're all younger than my youngest child. You know what I mean? So you know, it, they they had great energy. The singer Jojo is brilliant. So um, you know, I still go to gigs where I leave thinking that's one of the best gigs I've ever been to. You know,
Yeah.
I don't. I try and avoid some of the heritage bands. You know, especially if I've seen them in an earlier phase.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I kind of would like to see Blondie, but then Um, you know, I saw Blondie in 1978. I was 16, and it was just like that was a great night.
Where were they on at?
And they were on a club called Barbarella's in Birmingham.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's
That was
really cool.
also that was a school night. That was, I think that was a Tuesday or a Wednesday. But you know, so yeah, maybe I would quite like to see them. But there are other bands that you know, I'd rather go, as I say, and see somebody new.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
and I mean, occasionally I am, you know, by far the oldest person in the room. I mean, when everything emerged, which seems like only yesterday, but it's probably more than 15 years ago now. I used to see everything quite a lot. And I went down, I saw them play in Cardiff, I think. And someone came up to me at the end, and they said, "Oh, which one of them is your kid?" And I'm like, "Oh no, I'm just a fan." They go, "Are you the manager?" I'm like, "No, no, I'm just like a fan. I'm just here. You know, I'm on the guest list, but I'm just a fan." Um, and you know, I mean, I think they're a really great band.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned briefly that you were a concert promoter. Did you enjoy doing that?
Yeah, I really did. I mean, I did it in. I was a lot more enthusiastic uh, than competent. Um, I mean, what would happen? I mean, just for people who don't know that part of my history, this is 86 to 90 probably. Um, and I just hear bands that I really liked. And I'd noticed they hadn't got any gigs in Manchester. And so I would think, well, I probably know already half your audience. So if I can find a venue for you, then why don't you come and play?
Yeah.
And you know, all the bands want to play in Manchester, and I put a lot of gigs on at the Boardwalk, which at that time held about 150 people. So that's a good number to a good capacity for gigs where you're not expecting hordes of people.
Yeah.
So I ended up putting on the first Primal Scream gig in Manchester, for example, and then I put on Monday night in a gay club called the Archway. I put on with my friend Tim a band called Big Black. The front man of Big Black, Steve Albini, who went on and produced Pixies and In Utero for Nirvana and
Oh
so on.
yeah.
And there were like, I don't know, 80 people there or something. But it was a buzz. And like I say, I was doing it because kind of nobody else was. But then SJM, who obviously are massive, massive live promoters now, Simon Moran, who founded the company, he's a couple of years younger than me, and he was around a similar time to me, and he was kind of very organised and professional about it. So, sometimes I'd put a band on, and the next time I'd phone them up, and they're going, "Oh no, we're doing a gig for SJM," and I'd be like, "Oh, okay, see ya." And so he knew what he was doing, and yeah, so his empire was being built just as mine was crumbling, basically. But also the DJing took over. I mean that period, 86 to 90, was such a period of change in Manchester, where live music, a lot of bands generally, although people maintained an interest in all that, there was suddenly a whole new way of consuming music. I mean, not entirely new, obviously. I mean, it wasn't like we invented clubbing or, we invented dance music, because obviously Manchester always had that in the black clubs and the gay clubs and the Northern Soul clubs. But in terms of, clubs like the Hacienda, at the end of the 80s, it was all about DJs, wasn't it? So
yeah,
that began to take over my life a little bit more. So yeah, I let my live music empire crumble. I had other stuff to do, and also 1988, my son was born. So by the end of the 80s, I had my hands full with lots of stuff.
is it okay if we get onto the Hacienda and stuff soon? I just want to talk about your fanzine, Debris.
Yeah, well
Uh,
that was finishing around the same time, because it had started in 83. I think the last one was 88, maybe. I did about 3 or 4 issues a year, something like that. And I mean, looking back on it, it's again pretty amateurish, but it opened a lot of doors for me. People were very encouraging. I mean, that was the thing about that scene that I describe as being quite small at the beginning of the 80s. As it built, it did feel like it was a collective endeavor. James would go on tour with Happy Mondays. Uh, you know, uh, uh, John Cooper Clarke would, pay for the Fall to, record. Uh, all the bands looked after each other.
yeah,
They shared rehearsal rooms. Went on tour with each other, and yeah. So I don't know why I was telling you that, but anyway, so that was all a part of it. And the fanzine people were very enthusiastic. So when I wanted to interview Morrissey or James or Sonic Youth or Terry Hall or anyone that I asked always said yes.
yeah.
So I ended up doing loads of interviews. But the other thing about Debris was that I was able to also write about books, we were talking about earlier. Write about books and films and politics and whatever I wanted to write about, really. So I think a fanzine for me was a kind of a blog. What became a blog in the sense that you'd write about what was interesting you and what you wanted to share with people, and for me it reflected all my interests.
My next question was it through the fanzine that you interviewed Morrissey? But you've just said it
Yeah,
was.
it was. Yeah, it was. Yeah, so that was. Oh, right. Yeah, we're coming up to the 40th anniversary of me interviewing Morrissey. So
Why? What date were it? Can you
it,
remember?
it was the 27th of December 1983.
All right.
Because I remember it was in that dull period between Christmas and New Year, and the Smiths also were about to fly off to America um, for their first gigs in America. And yeah, I think maybe I should reenact it as a on the 40th anniversary of the interview and
What
get
were
a
it like? Did you enjoy
get a flipping classical orchestra to come and play.
it? Did you enjoy the gig?
That's what all the nostalgists, that's what they all want, isn't it? Oh yeah,
Yeah.
we'll get a classical orchestra. So yeah, we'll have somebody playing me, someone playing Morrissey, and an orchestra. And yeah. And I've still got the transcript, so I've got the script. So
Yeah, we still got it.
maybe I should do that.
You need.
Remind me nearer the time, get it
Yeah, I
sorted.
will. I will do. Yeah, what were you like, Morrissey? Then.
He was a very funny guy. I mean, funny in all meanings of the word. I mean, me and him, I met him a few times around that period, and we just used to get in hysterics. He was just very dry sense of humor. We had a lot of the same reference points in terms of books and music. Um, and he was a very engaging character. Um, and I interviewed him a few times. I think middle of 1985, when the Meet His Murder album came out. I think that was the last time that I interviewed him.
Yeah.
Obviously, our relationship in the last 10 years has become quite strained
Yeah.
uh, for reasons that everyone knows about. And I mean, if you do know my story, you'll know that I kind of went to war with against some of his views, whatever it was, 5 or 6 years ago. Yeah, because I found. I mean, I don't know if I wasn't hanging out. I wasn't hanging out with him in that period. All I was doing was listening to what he was saying, and once he started saying that he was a fan of Farage and he was, supporting Tommy Robinson, all kinds of dodgy stuff. I thought, well, uh, having hung out with him, and as I say, found him to be quite an engaging and intelligent guy. I was kind of shocked, really, as it all unfolded, and I thought, well, either I shut up or you know, or call him out on it. And he's a big fan of free speech, and so am I. So I thought, well, you're free to say what you want, and I'm free to say you're talking divisive bollocks, and I'm going to put on a club night playing black music on the doorstep of your next gig at Castlefield Basin, and just to nail my colours to the mast.
He cancelled that tour, did he? Was that the tour that he cancelled?
Yeah, he cancelled it. Yeah, he wasn't. Him and his manager took offence basically at some of the stuff I was doing. Dave has been. That's what he called me. Dave
Yeah, I
has,
saw that. Yeah, yeah.
which yeah, didn't quite hit the heights of humour that he'd hit in 1983 when I first met him, but it was a reasonable attempt at putting me down. But it was to be honest, it was a very difficult couple of months for me because it's difficult in the sense that uh, it obviously a lot of people were angry that I was angry. A lot of people were the diehard Morrissey fans saw it as some kind of personal attack on them. And then when he cancelled the gigs, obviously, they were all kind of incandescent that, I might have played some kind of a role in all that, although I don't really know if I did or to what extent. His manager started a Twitter account just to slag me off, which I thought was quite funny. He only wrote 3 tweets and then he deleted his account, and they were all having a go at Dave Has Been. And I thought, why get involved? Just do what you want to do, Morrissey. Play your gigs, play your music, mouth off, but allow me to do what I want to do. And so once again, I was 100% happy with my life choices. And it was difficult though, because I had a couple of death threats. I had a lot of pressure on social media. But at the same time, I had a load of support, and I had privately a few people who couldn't really put their head above the parapet in the same way as I did, privately messaged me and said, you're absolutely right, and it's at times somebody called him out on it all. And
Was that Johnny Marr that messaged you that?
No, not Johnny, no, but and people also, digging up stuff that you'd said in previous years, previous decades, trying to put it all together. But yeah, anyway, that was it'll all be in my best-selling book, Me and Morrissey, which will be out one day. Not in time for this Christmas, but it'll be some roller coaster, that's for sure.
You also wrote for the Enemy. How did that come about?
That was through the fanzine, and also
Yeah.
in those days, they had there was a lot of the Enemy was very all the media was very London centric, but they knew that they needed people in Manchester or Sheffield or Liverpool and other places who had their ears close to the ground, who could bring new stuff to their attention. Obviously, Paul Morley had that role at one point. Mick Middles, so a whole load of journalists in the 70s and 80s. So they kind of needed somebody as well. It wasn't, they just needed somebody so that, and I ended up doing the first interview the Enemy had with Happy Mondays, for example. But, that for them, they saw me as being like the local journalist for the local bands, which was a bit frustrating because a lot of the music I listened to, wasn't made in Manchester. I wanted to interview Public Enemy, but ended up with Happy Mondays in Cheetham Hill on a wet Thursday. That was another bus journey and a half to get to them. Anyway.
Did you take John Peel to see Public Enemy?
Yeah, I did. Well, no, he took me.
Did he?
Yeah, he phoned me up, and he had a +1 on his guest list. And in fact, so I arranged to meet him in Piccadilly Records, which was on Piccadilly Gardens at the time.
Yeah.
And we went for a curry, and then we went to watch Public Enemy and the Beastie Boys.
Were it a good gig?
That was 1987. Amazing gig, really amazing. Yeah. So jumping forward 30 years, let's talk about some of the books I can plug, Ethan.
All right, yeah, sure. I was going to get onto the books later, but we're going to do it now.
All right, how long have we got then?
How long? I've got a lot of questions, so it says how long.
Well, we can either do a part 2 or yeah. No, it's up to you. Honestly, it's up to you. As long as I don't want to come across as somebody who spends his whole life, reminiscing about the old days. I mean, I loved it all.
Yeah.
Celebrating it all, and I will talk forever about it to people who are genuinely interested, like yourself. But I don't want to kind of give the impression that live in the past or whatever.
Well, it's totally up to you. I've got questions on the Hacienda. Then I've got asking something about your autobiography, and then your touring with Stone Roses and stuff. The 24-hour Party People film, and then asking about your books and what you've got in store for the future and stuff like that.
Okay, well, yeah. So let's talk about the autobiography then, I guess, because that'll cover a few things.
All right,
I
yeah.
mean, that came out in 2018. Sonic Youth Slept on My Floor, it's called. So obviously, that I mean, it isn't a name drop, it isn't. I did an interview with somebody, um, and a guy called Robert Elms, who's on Radio London, I think. He's a good guy, Robert. Um, and he'd not read the book, but anyway, he was happy to interview me for Radio London, and we sat in the studio, and he kind of was scanning the front and the back to try and get a clue as to what he might talk to me about. He'd not done his research like you have. Anyway, he said to me, "Oh, Sonic Youth slept on my floor," and I'm like, "Yeah." And he said, "Did Sonic Youth sleep on your floor?" And I'm like, "Yeah." He said, "Madonna slept on my floor." I'm like, "Oh, okay." He said, "When I was living in a squat with Sade." And I'm like, "Okay, you win, Robert." But I had to explain to him it wasn't a name drop. It was the book. The book is about a lot of the things that we've talked about how great it is and exciting to be in and around things as they are beginning, as they are progressing, when they're not mainstream or commercial, when people are genuinely sleeping on each other's floor because that's the only way to make the tour work.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
and that kind of experience is the thing that united the 18-year-old me with the, at that point, whatever age I was, 58-year-old me or whatever. 40 years of being involved in music was always about um, looking for exciting stuff, but also trying to work in a kind of collective spirit, um, and just doing it for the love, and just waking up trying to make something exciting happen in your life. Um, so yeah, and yeah, and I mean, I'd written 4 books before that, which came out of my journalism, really.
August, how did the books come about? Yeah.
Yeah, and then so it wasn't like I kind of just launched straight into my autobiography. I'd done 4 other books, and I thought, well, people keep asking me about all these things, and it's great that they do. But if I write an autobiography, then at least I've kind of got my all this stuff written down, and a lot of the stuff in the book is me paying homage to the likes of John Peel, Tony Wilson, and other people who've helped me, who've opened doors for me. So the book was very much also about the importance of people who are established in music and the older generation to open the door for younger people, rather than to pull up the ladder from under them so that they have no opportunity to show their creativity. I think that's really poor behavior. So yeah, it's also me saying, well, John Peel, Tony Wilson, those kind of characters, they gave me opportunity, and so many other people opportunity and inspiration. So the book is not so much my ego as my homage to my community, my music community.
Well, that's one of the questions I've got here about your autobiography. You said that the book is about the influence of other people on your life. So, who would you say had the most influence?
Wow. Well, I mean, I guess uh, in terms of career, probably Tony Wilson, because I mean, if Tony Wilson, I mean, the Hacienda obviously gave me a DJing career. I mean, I had a DJing career before, but it kind of gave me an identity, and it gave me years and years of work, and great experience, really. Um, And I think Tony was somebody who he saw a lot of what was happening in at Factory and the Hacienda. He saw it as a way of everyone becoming millionaires, which didn't happen really, not at the time. But he also saw it as a kind of artistic project. He never lost sight of being part of an artistic avant-garde. You know, for him, it was like when the Hacienda closed, he said, I don't want it to be a museum, you
Yeah,
know? I mean, lots of other people were walking around wailing that the Hacienda had closed. And he was like, well, it's been there 15 years. We did great things. I don't want it to be a museum. I've got other stuff to do. And people forget that, you know, but I haven't forgotten it. You know, for me, my life post Hacienda, I mean, the club closed however long ago it was now. I don't even know what year it is, to be honest, Ethan. But 26 years ago, the club closed.
yeah,
So, you know, I've had as much of a working life subsequent to the club closing as I had before the club had closed. And for me, you know, it was right. What's next? Move on. Um, you know, move on with the DJing. Try and avoid doing too many Hacienda reunion nights, and also follow some of the passions that I'd not had time really to follow. So, um, you know, as you know, my current writing project is a series of small format books, and the subjects include Pablo Picasso, Sylvia Plath, Courtney Love. There's a book called Not All Roses, which is about Stephen Cresser, who used to hang out with the Stone Roses. All You Need Is Dynamite, which is a book about a group of kind of anarchist revolutionaries who lived for a while in Manchester and tried to blow up a couple of buildings in Manchester whilst under the influence of LSD. So that's quite an interesting story.
yeah.
So, you know, I mean, and I absolutely, you know, love that project, you know, and for me, I'm currently writing book 8 of that series. And I'm as passionate about it. I mean, I was up this morning, 7:30 writing, you know, just
You
because I
are.
would,
I'm sorry.
and it makes me, you know, and for me, you know, 1989, I'd have been up at 7:30, either with my son, who was then about, you know, a year old, or I'd have got up early to get into Eastern Bloc or Piccadilly Records to listen to the records that had just come in, to hear what I wanted to play at the Hacienda. You know, I've always been so enthusiastic about that, and I feel just as motivated and exciting about this. And also, uh, you know, the books come out maybe one a year or two a year, and they're always an excuse to do a whole load of book events. So I've been in the last 4 or 5 years, I've been doing 30 or 40 events a year all around the country, um, talking about sometimes talking about, you know, DJing, sometimes talk about the Hacienda, usually talking about the books that I've written uh, more recently. So I'm still that idea of being on stage, part of a community, an audience in front of me, relating to what I'm playing or what I'm saying. That is still very much a part of what I do. So, you know, in the same way as I used to get a massive buzz from going to the Man Alive Club to see some band in front of 50 people, you know, honestly, I like, you know, going over to York or Pontefract or, you know, Bristol or somewhere, and just spending the evening talking to people, you know, might only be 50, might be 150, on my book tours, and talking to them about all these ideas and what motivates me. and again, I feel like I'm part of a community and I'm connecting, and I'm connecting with words rather than music. But to me, it all kind of makes sense.
Yeah, do you think you got that kind of ethos from Manchester to like looking to the next project and into the future?
Yeah, and I think that's what I mean about Tony Wilson being an inspiration. But also, I think in right going right back to uh, the late 70s when I first really became interested in music, punk had just happened, and there were lots of people with kind of Mohican haircuts and you know uh, leather jackets and bondage trousers and walking around being punks and forming punk bands, which were all, pretty much two chord thrash guitar music. But then I was kind of thinking, well, wouldn't it be more punk to kind of rip up all the formula? And then there were all these bands like the Pop Group and A Certain Ratio and Public Image Limited who did exactly that. They ripped up the punk formula and they were like, it should be about continuous revolution. It should be about no, no formulas, nothing obvious, nothing predictable. And that's more punk than punk. You see
Yeah,
what I mean? So that idea of continuous revolution, that idea of as you change as a person and as the world changes, you find a new way of expressing yourself is really important to me. So that means constantly looking forwards, really. You can learn a lot from the past and you can document and celebrate the past, but ultimately you've got to be looking forwards and you've got to be thinking of who am I today and what do I want to say today? And when you're my age, that as I am now, that is obviously going to be different to when I was 21.
yeah, yeah. There's another bit in your autobiography when you say that you listen, keeping an ear out to the music in New York because of Blondie, and
Mm.
then ironically, the nightclubs and music in New York kind of inspired the Hacienda. Was that a weird combination for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's again something that's sometimes forgotten is that influential early factory time in Manchester. Everybody was looking at New York. Tony Wilson was absolutely in love with New York. He took A Certain Ratio over there in 1980 to record their first proper album. He
Yeah,
took Martin Hannett over there. He ended up, while he was over there, signing the New York band ESG. He did when Tony used to do In the City, which was a music conference that he started in 1992. He was always, I think the first year he invited Seymour Stein, who was like, a proper bigwig in New York who created Sire Records. So that link between Manchester and New York was really strong. And it was that late 1980 when he was with A Certain Ratio in New York and also New Order that they hit upon the idea of coming back and trying to build a club that was more like some of the New York clubs that they were in than the kind of disco era clubs that were around in Manchester at the time. So New York was a big inspiration to loads of people, I think, and because it was a music city, and I think also creative people are always, I think they what I call porous. They will absorb whatever they need from wherever they need, from wherever they want. And I think sometimes in more recent years, Manchester's got a bit inward looking and a bit parochial. Um, and it's all about, if you've got an M20 postcode or an M19 postcode, and, you're kind of somehow blessed with, or an M1 or an M3 or an M23 or whatever postcode, you're somehow kind of blessed with some supernatural ability in music which nobody else has. But really, creativity is not about the postcode. It's about the mindset. And so that, or that not writing anywhere off, I think, is always really important.
Yeah. I'm just wondering, how long have you got to like tonight to do this? Just 'cause I've got a lot of questions, I don't want to
Uh,
take up too much of your time, if you know what I mean.
7 minutes, Ethan.
Genuinely.
Yeah, because I'm meant to be somewhere else in half an hour.
All right, no worries then. What do you want to do? Do you want to do a part two or?
Uh, if you want to do part two, I will do a part two. Yes, of course. I like to say yes.
All right, well,
And I like the fact that you've done your research. You're not like that guy from Radio London who's just read the front and the back of my autobiography. So if we call an end to it now as part one, and then whenever you want, uh, let's do part two. I've enjoyed this a lot, so
yeah, yeah,
thank you.
thank you for taking time and
All right.
all right,
Cheers. See
cheers.
you on part two.
To part two, yeah. Hi Dave, thank you for coming back on the channel again to do the part two. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, yeah. Part two. Aren't we? Aren't we an interesting couple?
I'm not going to do it as two-part videos. I'm going to just do it as one long video. But obviously, we're going to have different clothes and stuff. So
Yeah.
let's say it's part two. So the last time we spoke, we were talking about your books. Your autobiography and the Hacienda. We briefly touched on it. So I just want to continue with the Hacienda and your DJing. The first time you went to the Hacienda was in 1985. What was that first time like?
The first time I DJ'd, yeah. I think I might have DJ'd before then. I can't really remember. But the thing about that period, probably up until about 87, um, DJing at Hacienda wasn't a big thing. Do you know? I mean, I'm not kind of just being self-deprecating or playing it down, but at that time, um, there were big DJs on the soul scene and the reggae scene, but in the kind of alternative world, um, DJs didn't really have names, or a following or anything. So I wasn't at all intimidated by DJing at the Hacienda. And because at that point they had no history of successful DJ nights, I had no role model. Nothing. No, they couldn't compare me with anything else. So when I actually started my residency, I started every Thursday, and then a couple of months later, I started every Saturday, and that was the middle of '86. And I did both of the nights for 2.5 years, and then Thursday only for the next year and a half. So I think it was good for me that uh, that I wasn't going into a situation where a lot was expected of me.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember the first night I did in May '86. 500 people came, and the management were absolutely ecstatic. It was like high fives and, do you want another can of breaker? But then, within a year, 500 would have been, a career-ending number. I mean,
Yeah.
by a year or two later, it was 1,000. By 89, 90, it would be 1,200, 1,500. So it just, the nights built. But being there every week really helped because you were building a community of people who were obviously appreciative of what you were playing. It wasn't a bunch of strangers every week. And I had, hours really to, win them over or, play a lot of stuff they didn't know. And so the thing about DJing is you need a good crowd. You need a crowd that's open-minded and a crowd that will really, lock into what you're playing. And if you're playing every week, then people get used to your style and, the kind of stuff you do. And sometimes, when you DJ now, you get people coming up all the time and asking for records. I DJ'd the other week, and I put a record on, and by the time the record had finished, I'd had 4 requests. And I'm like, and I was thinking to myself, you don't know what I play. You don't know whether I'll enjoy it or not. Why come straight to the DJ and demand a record you probably heard play 10,000 times? Why not just get yourself a drink, have a little
Leave you
chat
to
with
it
your
kind of
mate.
thing.
Just say, if you're not liking it after an hour or an hour and a half, come and see me,
Yeah.
But to kind of treat a DJ like a kind of jukebox is a dead weird thing. Whereas back in the Hacienda days, the only thing people would bug you for was to find out what you played. They didn't expect you to play lots of stuff they knew. They wanted you to play stuff they didn't know. So they'd bang on the door and they'd go, "What was the record you just played?" And you'd write it on a flyer and you'd give it to them. And obviously the flyer's now worth more than the record they went out and bought. But that was a sign of a great crowd, and that was
Yeah.
a sign of a successful night.
Well, like you say, people coming up to you now with like Spotify, YouTube, and stuff. If there's a song they wanted, they could just listen to it themselves, couldn't they?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I do get a bit grumpy, and I'm like, well, and they, and they start justifying what they're saying by, everyone will dance, or they play it on the radio, or whatever. But none of that means anything to me because, as you say, if they just wanted to hear stuff they already knew, they could stay at home.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's the weirdest, like one of the weirdest moments of your life. The time where Jeremy Kyle came up to you and asked you to play Black Eyed Peas.
Yeah, that was, well, I mean, the whole context was a flipping weird night, that one. It was Eamon Holmes's 50th birthday party. I mean, what a gig to get. Luckily, I had only 1 hour between. No, I think first it was Coronation Street Stars karaoke. It was like karaoke with various actors and actresses from Coronation Street, and then there was an Elvis impersonator who he went over time. He got an encore, went over time, which was good because it meant I only had 45 minutes instead of an hour. Because to be honest, I didn't know if I had anything that like that Venn diagram thing that you get taught at school, where you everything that is grey and animals, and then the grey
Yeah,
animals are in the crossover bit, like elephants or
yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
So I had like a Venn diagram, things that Eamon Holmes and his friends would like, and things that I would like. And I'd worked out about an hour's worth of material, and that was it.
Yeah.
I found out his favourite song was Combine Harvester by the Wurzels. So I was really up against it. And so only having 45 minutes was really good, And I played things like Get Up Off of That Thing by James Brown and, things like that. Anyway, yeah. And then near the end of my set, the only person who asked for a request, was Jeremy Kyle, who asked for the Black Eyed Peas, which I didn't play. You could see that I wasn't that impressed. I mean, I like some of their songs, but he clearly what he wanted was I Got a Feeling.
Yeah,
Which at the time was you'd hear it everywhere.
yeah, yeah.
Because sometimes people don't say, will you play Superstition by Stevie Wonder? They just say, will you play some Stevie Wonder?
Yeah.
But because there was one occasion I was playing a Stevie Wonder record that wasn't Superstition. At the very moment, someone came and said, will you play a Stevie Wonder record? So I knew Jeremy Kyle only wanted to hear I Got a Feeling. And yeah, and because it was so overplayed, I didn't have it with me. But when he could see that I was a bit unimpressed, he said, oh, it's for my wife. So he kind of shifted the blame for
Yeah.
the ball request onto his wife.
Back to the Hacienda. Like
Yeah, please.
the owners and the management like left you to play what you want. Did that help you in your DJing career?
Uh, I guess so. Yeah, they trusted the DJs. I mean, in the middle of 1988, there were one, two, three, four, five resident DJs spread over 4 nights. Uh, yeah, I mean, that sounds incredible now. So there were no guest DJs. Um, and and we'd all been DJing at the Hacienda for a while. Or I mean, remember Laurent Garnier coming to the club and starting to DJ with us. But so it was a very small little team, and that was the factory records way. I mean, the bands had a lot of control over what they did.
Yeah,
You know, and same with the DJs. They Once you'd got the job and you'd been doing it, proved that you could do it well, and as long as you weren't kind of developing some, bad timekeeping, turning up late or getting off your head too much, as long as they didn't have any kind of disciplinary reason to get rid of you, they were just really happy, if anything, to let the DJs take care of that, because they had, they got sort of security and stocking the bar and booking a few bands and, you know, and so the fact that they could just let the DJs get on with it was good, good for them. But it was really the philosophy of factory
yeah,
to once you were in the family and once you were trusted to do a job, you would just let loose, really. And I mean, the one thing it did mean long term was that I never subsequently went anywhere where anyone told me what to play. I was like, well, if that attitude is good enough for the Hacienda, then it's good enough for, whatever other event or other venue I might play at.
yeah. I was going to say, do you remember the time the Hacienda took off? But you said before it kind of gradually grew.
Yeah,
Uh,
it did gradually grow from that period, where they kind of basically got rid of booking lots of bands and just put the DJs on. And there's no overnight success. There's a saying, it takes years of hard work to become an overnight success. And so the only way to really be authentic and to have any longevity is to do it in an unhyped, natural way. So, like I say, the numbers of people coming to the 2 nights that I was doing started at 500 and went up eventually, a year or 18 months later to 1,200. I mean, there was definitely a period when ecstasy started becoming used in the club, which kind of started at the end of 87 and then really took off around February, March 88. And that just changed literally the chemistry of the room, in the sense that before then, people were drinking alcohol, maybe doing a bit of speed, maybe drinking cider. It was a kind of basic experience. So as DJs, you could kind of take everyone on a journey so far, but once the atmosphere was changing because the drug changed, I think it became a much more intense experience for people on the dance floor.
yeah,
So although we didn't really, I mean, there was certain kinds of music sounded probably better to them, to the audience. because of the state they were in. They didn't want to hear "Get Up Off of That Thing" by James Brown. They wanted to hear new house, hip house, techno, hip hop. So, so that was a change. So it wasn't so much a change in the music as a kind of change in as I say, the chemistry of the room that meant that it went from being a great night out to potentially a life-changing night out for the people who were there.
Well, my next question was, do you think the scene would have took off as much if there wasn't any ecstasy? Like if ecstasy wasn't a thing?
Well, it wouldn't have taken off so much, but it was so on the way to taking off already that it was definitely turning the club into somewhere very special. And there was already people travelling into Manchester from Wolverhampton, St Helens, Leeds, all those kinds of places to come to the Hacienda before the arrival of ecstasy. I mean, there's an argument that house music in general and the whole subsequent birth and evolution of club culture and DJ culture, there's an argument that if it wasn't for ecstasy, none of that would have happened. But there was definitely, there was it was definitely something was happening, already. But whether it would have gone so massive, I don't really know. I mean, you look at footage of places like Shelley's in Stoke and Quadrant Park in Liverpool. This would be 1990, 91, so a little bit later. But it was you can see those nights were completely ecstasy filled. Angels in Burnley, it was another place. And so I don't know whether the people of Stoke would have gone for house and techno without having, their chosen stimulant. I mean, there is a great dance music tradition and culture in Stoke, as it happens, with Northern Soul and disco. But when you look at footage of, as I say, of Shelley's in Stoke or Quadrant Park in Liverpool, it's incredible. But it's incredible partly, and it's evident from the film, partly because people are completely off their heads.
Yeah. Do you remember the time the club changed and drug dealers and gangsters started taking over?
Yeah, yes. I mean, people, I think, sometimes watch too many Martin Scorsese films and think that gangsters are like the coolest people. But they were so uncool when it came to the Hacienda. Number one, they started coming because they wanted to control the trade of illegal drugs in the club.
Yeah.
But they were very late onto it. I mean, there were months went by before any of the gangsters who were running protection rackets in Salford and hijacking supermarket wages vans realised that they could make money out of the Hacienda. We had ages before any of them found their way there. So that's quite uncool. And then when they did find their way there to the Hacienda, instead of thinking, okay, we could be a bit subtle about this, we'll probably get away with it. And, if we keep our heads down, we can probably work and control the drug trade in the Hacienda for as long as that club lasts. Instead of doing that, they drew maximum attention to everything they were doing, shouting their mouths off, stealing drinks or demanding drinks from behind the bar, trying to shoot any member of any other gang who happened to be around. So as a consequence, they kind of killed the goose that laid the golden egg.
Yeah.
They cleared the Hacienda. They closed the Hacienda ultimately. And they went back to running protection rackets in Salford. And I mean, I'm sure they're doing okay wherever they are now. But they were the least cool people I think I've ever met. Occasionally that one of them would have a birthday, one of these gangsters, and some of the doormen who were in league with the gangsters, they'd have a birthday party, and it would just be like the worst party ever. They'd have really bad DJs and strippers and all kinds of stuff. So the idea of them being glamorous was just so far from the truth. And as a DJ, there's nothing you can do about that. It's not the job of the DJ to organise the door policy, but but it was one more burden for the management. And I did feel, I felt that the management were a bit out of their depth, really, because, like me, people like Mr. Gretton and Mr. Wilson and the manager, Paul Mason, they were successful, so successful in what they were doing in music. But that didn't mean that they had any knowledge or experience of what to do with, kids with guns. Nothing can kind of prepare you for having to deal with a situation like that. And you can be the manager of one of the greatest bands in the world, but that's your strength, and your strength isn't working out a strategy of how to defeat the gangsters.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing about the management was that, Wilson and Gretton particularly were kind of old hippies. They were like old dropouts. And so they didn't want to deal with the police. So when it came to, for example, when it came to Cream in 93, 94, and Cream in Liverpool came under pressure from a load of gangsters, they cut a deal with the police for the police to have armed policemen on the door. They saw the police as allies, whereas I think Gretton and Wilson, because they had that kind of rebellious hippie anti-authority thing about them, which was fine and good, and it would probably help them get where they got to. It didn't help them in their dealings with the police. The lawyer the police tried to close the club in 1990, and the lawyer representing the Hacienda, a man called George Carman, he said to Tony Wilson before the court hearing, try not to say anything, because he knew that although Tony had the gift of the gab, he was unlikely to say anything helpful in their bid to try and keep the police away. He'd probably start lecturing the magistrate about how drugs should be legalized, or do some kind of lecture about, the medical, how good ecstasy is for your mental health. He'd be lecturing the magistrate on the history of popular culture. So George Carman QC said the only advice he actually gave the Hacienda was not to let that man Wilson near the microphone. But that was when we did 24-hour Party People, and we filmed it in a warehouse in Ancoats, because it was a few months after the club had been demolished, so they had to recreate it. And they spent 125 grand on recreating it for 2 nights, the filmmakers. And so we had to bring in an audience of extras so that they could film the Hacienda. So 600 or so extras. And Tony was like, oh, we need gangsters. We need it to be authentic, and oh yeah, we need Salford to do the door, the very team that had basically wrecked his club. He said, yeah. I want it to be just like Hacienda. And luckily the filmmakers were like, well, this is a film set, so this is kind of our rules apply. And it makes no sense for us to spend 125 grand on rebuilding Hacienda for one night or two nights if what we film is going to be unusable because, you know, there's fighting or intimidation or violence or whatever. Yeah, so Tony had that kind of almost like some kind of theory that creativity comes out of chaos. And, you know, in a lot, probably on a lot of occasions, it worked for him. You know, throwing a whole lot of stuff together and then hoping something will happen and then walk away. You know, that was kind of part of his personality, but on some occasions it was kind of inappropriate, really.
Did you get a gun pulled out at you at the Hacienda? Did it pull you? Oh, it was in your autobiography, wasn't it?
Say again.
The story about you getting a gun pulled out at you at the Hacienda, that was in your autobiography, wasn't it?
Yeah. That happened. I say only the once, but it's a difficult one to talk about because, you know, I literally had hours and hours of 100% great vibes at the Hacienda.
Yeah.
And 99% of the people who knocked on the door of the Hacienda were, you know, cool people. But obviously, as things deteriorated, regrettable stuff like that happened. And it was while I was DJing. And the DJ box was enclosed. So the only way to get into the DJ box was to bang on the door at the back and then be let in. And sometimes you'd ignore it because, you know, you were trying to get your work done. And sometimes you'd open the door and it would be, I remember Mike Pickering bringing in Martin Fry from ABC, who I was a massive fan of. So you didn't always want to keep the door locked. And, but then on this one occasion, my Russian roulette skills let me down, and I opened the door, and there was this guy just pulled a gun from under his coat and pointed it at me, and demanded my records. It's about 1:55. We closed at 2:00, so it was about 5 minutes before the end of the night. And because I was so shocked, I just banged the door shut.
Yeah.
Obviously, I didn't want to engage him in conversation. I banged the door shut, and I knew that we were emptying soon anyway. It was 2:00. So I kind of thought, right, well, I'm not opening the door until literally I see the cleaners sweeping up the dance floor, which I knew would be like 25 minutes away by the time they got. So I just sort of locked myself in there and just thought, wow, did that really happen? You know, kind of peering out, see if I could see the guy leaving the club. And after that, we installed a little spy hole in the door, so that if someone was banging on the door, you could check through the spy hole, and you know, and you obviously encouraged just to open the door to people who you knew.
Well, obviously that's a bad memory of the Hacienda, but have you got a favourite memory of playing there?
No, I think my favorite memories of all when I mean it was kind of complicated because the club was open for 15 years, and like I said, I did 2 nights, Thursday, Saturday, for 2.5 years or so, and then I only did Thursday for the next bit, and then the club itself closed temporarily at the beginning of 1990, and I went, and they invited me back. So I kind of felt like I had something to prove, you know, all over again, to start all over again, and it worked really well. And then for various reasons, I left the club again, and then they invited me back in '96. And again, I'm happy to say that I kind of really smashed it. So my happiest memories of the fact that every time the Hacienda wanted me to, you know, do something good and bring some people in and create a really good vibe and build that crowd, I did it. And so, like anyone who has a job, there's job satisfaction just doing it well, basically.
Yeah.
And so I like the fact that I'd never left, because people had stopped coming to hear me play. The happiest thing really was just the fact that, yeah, I did it. I did exactly what they wanted me to do and what I wanted to do. So, yeah, so that's probably, rather than any particular occasion, that kind of fact is what I'm probably most happy about.
Yeah. If we could just go back to 24-hour party people, what was that experience like?
I mean, I really enjoyed it. Uh, the reproduction of the Hacienda was very, very good. And the party that was thrown with all the extras was really good. It was obviously a bit surreal because, for example, John Sim, who was Bernard in the film, he was there. And I mean, he's a bit of a clubber anyway. If you remember later, he was in Human Traffic.
Yeah. He was
Um,
at that Fat Boy Slim on the beach in Brighton.
yeah, he was. Yeah, he was. I don't. Did Human Traffic come before or after 24-hour party people? Maybe it came before. John Sim was there, but also Bernard was there. So you had the actor playing. The person the actor was playing was also there. So that was kind of quite surreal because obviously when they were filming it, they didn't want people like Bernard or Mike Pickering to be in shot because obviously they were being played by somebody else. So it did get a bit complicated on occasions to keep John Sim and Bernard away from each other, for example. Uh, Quite similar people, actually, both really, really good guys. Um, yeah, so it was quite surreal, but actually it was a really good night. As a representation of the Hacienda, it was pretty much spot on, and the filmmakers were mega happy with it.
Well, you mentioned that Bernard was there. There was quite a few different people from that era, like that were actually there. Was it an after party you had in that warehouse?
Uh,
And you and Mike Pickering DJ'd. Have I
yeah,
got
no, that was the film. That was the filming.
Yeah, the film. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, basically they said, well, the original plan was, they said, yeah, get in like 600 people into this space, but everybody was told that the music would stop occasionally because they'd have to run a scene, with like Steve Coogan. There's a bit where Steve Coogan walks through the crowd saying, well, we do things differently here or whatever, or, the birth of the DJ, the birth of the computer. And, but the filmmakers just loved the whole vibe of the music and the dancing and the night. They actually, I think they stopped the music once, and then a whole load of people had to come back the next day and kind of recreate it so that Wilson could walk through the crowd. And the filmmakers literally put all their cameras down, was like, right, we're going to party. This is fantastic. In fact, the director said to me that if he'd had his life again, he'd be a club promoter instead of a film director.
Do you
And then
think?
yeah, so if you look at the footage, the Hacienda scenes of all the dancing under the lights and the mirror ball, it's packed. But then if you look at the bits where Wilson's walking through the club, it's half empty because it was done the following day.
Do you think Steve Coogan did a good job of Tony Wilson?
Yeah, I think he did. I think he did. I mean, Coogan had been impersonating Wilson for years. I think it was one of the first. Wilson was one of the first impersonations that Coogan did. When he was first involved in comedy. So he knew exactly what to do and how to do it. Um, I think the film probably accentuates Tony at probably his most twattish in some ways. You know what I mean? I think there's quite a lot of laughing at Tony for being such a twat, whereas although most people like myself who had came into contact with him a lot knew there was that side to him, there was also a kind of he was also a guru type figure, and he was also always worth listening to.
Yeah.
Very articulate. Um, so in that sense, it wasn't necessarily a very accurate representation of Tony, but it accentuated things for comedic effect, I guess. And I mean, there were lots of factual errors, but I think the film sums up the spirit of a lot that was going on, pretty much.
Yeah, yeah. Did you see a lot of people like Steve Coogan, Noel Gallagher, a lot of people that went on to have careers in like the 90s in the Hacienda in its peak?
I remember. I mean, Noel. I don't think Coogan was often at the Hacienda. Noel was more of a regular because he knew quite a few people there. Because, as you know, he worked within Spiral Carpets.
Yeah.
Um, so he knew quite a lot of the bands, and so he would queue up. In fact, the last time I saw him, um, I thanked him for queuing up so patiently to pay £2 to hear me DJ. uh, I told him he helped me buy my first house, so without realizing. So, I mean, he was a massive music fan. So the thing about the Hacienda was that it attracted, this thing about the gangsters that we've been talking about. It, aside from them, it attracted people who were into music, and so they might, Noel wasn't necessarily into the same music as the DJs were, but he knew it was a good place to go down. And he, from a Wednesday to a Saturday, he could go there and he'd see people that he knew. The vibe would be good. It was a safe, especially early on, a safe place to be. So the Hacienda was just a magnet for creative people. I mean, I've met people since who've been filmmakers, journalists, writers, poets, fashion designers, and they all went in the Hacienda at one time.
Yeah.
They weren't necessarily music fans, but most of them were. They just loved being there. They loved, it wasn't just a kind of banging atmosphere. It was also a very kind of creative and interesting atmosphere. So
Yeah,
that all kinds of people who were around, anyone in Manchester who went on to do anything creative in the 90s would have been in the Hacienda at some point in the 80s.
yeah, like the social side was as important as the music side of things.
In some ways, yeah, in some ways. I mean, it was a big space. So it was a big space. It was impressive. What I remember quite often, people would bring people from out of town to show them what was going on. Tony loved bringing up music industry people from London. So he'd knock on the DJ box door and he'd sweep in his big coat and his Reebok trainers, and he'd say he'd introduce me to like the head of, I don't know, WEA, all kinds of like millionaire big shot industry people.
Yeah.
Because if they were in Manchester, they might have heard of the Hacienda, but hearing about it and experiencing it were two different things. So the fact he could take in someone like that on any day from Wednesday to Saturday, and know that they'd be impressed. I mean, he'd love that, So and the DJ box was a great vantage point to see the whole club, the dance floor, and so yeah, often he'd bring people in, and like I say, Mike Pickering. I remember him bringing Martin Fry in when I was more of a pal of Morrissey's than I am now. He used to come in and hang out in the Hacienda box.
Oh yeah.
Three or four times he came in anyway. So there's always stuff happening in there.
Yeah, yeah. You said before that Tony Wilson wanted gangsters and fighting in the film, and is that what you kind of fell out with him over with the film?
Yeah, I found out. Yeah, I did, and also because he wanted he wanted more control. I think what was getting under his skin was that uh, the filmmakers were in charge of the narrative, so they were telling his life story,
Yeah,
and that kind of being somebody who liked being listened to, and like everybody, he wanted to tell his own story. So there were one or two things that were happening in the film that I think he was unhappy with. And then when it came to the recreation of the night, the filmmakers asked me to find all the extras, and he wanted that job, or that was part of what he wanted to do, but they insisted I should do it. We fell out over that. We also fell out because after the film, I organised a conference at the Corner House Film Arts building in Manchester,
yeah,
and I organised like a debate about the role of women in factory records, because there was quite a lot of talk about how female representation in the film wasn't very good, and Gillian Morris was on the panel, and Lindsay Reed, who's also in the film, Tony's first wife, they were on the panel, and it really threw him. He didn't like it at all. And in fact, one of the women I'd invited onto the panel, he phoned them up and said that if they went on the panel, he'd never speak to them again. It's kind of weird stuff, really. It was daft stuff. But I mean, he'd fallen out with me probably 3 or 4 times before that, and then just we just cracked on and stuff happened. I mean, he fell out with me a little bit in when factory records went bankrupt, over a few articles and quotes of mine after it had happened. But then in 1995, he flew me over to Dublin in the city, got me involved in that. So I mean, we were always. And the thing is that he fell out with lots of people. He fell out with Paul Morley, Peter Saville, New Order. His relationship with Rob Gretton was pretty strained. Fell out really badly with Martin Hannett. So I think I don't feel like it was particularly a personal thing. I think it was just Tony always had a vision of what he wanted to do,
yeah,
with the label and the club. And he was very good at strategy, and he imagined the visions really well. But if you stood up to him and said, no, you got it wrong, what you need to do is X, Y, Z, he didn't really like it. So there was always kind of power struggles in his head. And there was a slightly paranoid aspect to what to how he operated. So he fell out with lots of people. So the fact he fell out with me, I don't really, for me, it's just like,
No, you don't take it as personal kind of thing.
well, I kind of take it as personal because I mean, I'm assuming it was partly personal, but
It's
you
just
know,
the way he's kind of thing.
if you list all the people that he fell out with and didn't speak to for years, like I say, Peter Saville, Martin Hannett, Paul Morley, then I don't really feel bad that I'm in that list really.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. Yeah,
And that, I mean, at other times, you know, we went out for dinner. We, he invited me to stuff. He trusted me to DJ, invited me back to the club in '96, as I say, to DJ. So, it was a roller coaster, really. But and also, I think that I mean, don't forget, I'd begun working in '86 with Tony. I knew him a little bit before then, but let's say I was working for him, getting paid for him by him from '86. It's like any workplace, whatever your job, there's always going to be friction between you and the boss at some point.
yeah,
And if that relationship and that job lasts for, 14, 15, 16 years, there's going to be things that you're going to fall out. And then you throw in the pressure of running a club and running a club, getting overrun by violence and a record label always on the brink of bankruptcy, then an environment of that pressured, you are going to fall out with people. There is going to be friction with all kinds of people. And so, it would be a surprise more like a surprise, really, if people with strong personalities had gone through that kind of situation and not at certain times come into conflict.
he said in an interview that like he was going to shoot you, wanted to get you shot and stuff like that. Was that like too far for you? Had he took it too far then?
I would have said,
Well, yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean, uh, yeah. I mean, by that time, it just become like a bit more of a deal for him than it really should have been. Because I was like a natural, in the cold light of day, I was a natural ally for him. You know, uh, and we had a lot in common, and we got on well. But yeah, there were times when uh, it went a bit far. I mean, I never wanted to shoot him, uh, but apparently at one point he said, yeah, he in an interview he said he wanted to have me shot. But my response to that was I phoned him up and left a message on his voicemail, just telling him what my address was, just in case he hadn't got it. I said, just to make your life a bit easier. If you're going to send somebody to shoot me and they're being paid by the hour, you don't want them looking for me all over South Manchester. And I gave him my address, just being a bit cheeky.
Did you ever hear out from him after that, before he died or anything?
Yeah, and there was a couple of times it was funny in some ways, but because obviously our paths kept crossing. And there was a couple of times when I think we kind of forgot that we're not meant to be speaking. And we'd go, oh, how are you? Yeah, yeah, how are you? What are you up to? And then I'm like, oh, I saw you do this. And then we ended up having a conversation. And then it kind of dawned on us, oh my God, we're having a conversation, but we're falling out. He'd normally be the first person for that to become aware, become aware of that. And he'd like trundle off. But yeah, so that was, yeah, I mean, like I say, for me, it's uh, that that kind of tension was really a product of how close we were working, but how high pressured it all was.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I mean, who are the two Man United strikers who never spoke to? Was it Teddy Sheringham and Dwight York, or Andy Cole?
Andy Cole. Yeah, I think it was Andy Cole and Teddy Sheringham. Yeah.
And they didn't speak, did they, for like a whole season or
Yeah,
two?
ages didn't like each other, did they? Yeah.
So whereas Tony came to my wedding, and we exchanged Christmas cards, and we had lots of mutual friends. So it wasn't in a way our relationship wasn't as bad as Andy Cole and Terry Sheringham's, but similarly, you just got on with it.
Yeah, well, I don't think they made up till after the careers had finished. I don't think.
Right.
But,
Okay. I don't really follow that story much, but I just remember being amazed that people could just work well together without getting on.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
So you never really know what's going on. Do you know what I mean? Sometimes maybe even I don't know. Anyway, it's I think Peter Hook's book. I've not read it in full. How Not to Run a Club,
Yeah.
but when it came out, I looked in the index to check what he'd said about me, which is kind of what you do. It's cheaper than buying the book. The bit about me and Wilson falling out is totally wrong. And in the book, I think he dates it from 1990. So it's almost every sentence in the paragraph about me falling out with Tony is completely wrong.
I've got that book actually. I haven't read it yet. Is it?
Well, it was number one in the fiction charts at one point. So that's a great accolade.
Do you not see out of Peter Rook or hear out from him or anything?
No, he phones me up occasionally, but it's not normally with friendly words.
Really? Have you fallen out with him as well?
Yeah, that's why I don't do the Hacienda nights.
Why? What happened with him? I didn't know you'd fallen out
Oh
with
my
him.
God. Ethan, you're getting all the dirt.
Did you not
Um,
talk about it? Or...
no, the thing with Hooky is, I mean, I admire him, and he's like such a hard-working fella. Um, but because of all the New Order shenanigans,
Yeah.
and the conflict between him and Bernard, which is like a kind of a divorce. Uh, I think he feels the need that you have to take sides. Like with a divorced couple, you have to, it's very hard to become friends with both of them. You have to choose, really.
Yeah, you can't be friends with him if you're friends with me, kind of thing.
Yeah. So I'm friends with New Order and Bernard and Stephen and Gillian. So by default, I cannot therefore be involved in anything that Team Hook get involved in.
Jeez. I tried messaging.
But I must say, I'd like to. I mean, it'd be nice to talk about something a bit more
Uplifting.
positive.
Yeah.
But the thing is, I am completely happy with all my life choices.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I understand
So,
that.
I don't lie awake at night thinking, uh, you know, that, regretting anything.
Yeah, yeah. Well, a bit of a lighter note now. Are we okay to talk about your books?
Yeah, always happy to do that.
I've got a list of a few. If you just want to talk about what they're about, how they came about, and stuff like that,
Okay.
whatever you like. We'll start off with Searching for Love, Courtney Love in Liverpool.
Well, that's one of my small format books. I've got a whole series of them, 7 so far, one more in April. And I just heard that Courtney Love, who I didn't know if I was a fan of, but I know I was very interested in her, obviously, as a kind of rock goddess phenomenon. So and I'd heard that she lived in Liverpool for 6 months. So the book was me indulging my curiosity by talking to lots of people in Liverpool about their memories of the young Courtney. She was there arrived age 17, obviously before Kurt Cobain, Hole, before any of that.
Yeah.
With a friend. She went with a friend, and I interviewed her, the friend, and yeah, it's a story really of. It ends up being a story of this pretty fucked up, I think, young woman
Yeah.
who fell in love with Liverpool, and because at that time there were bands like Echo and the Bunnymen, Teardrop Explodes, Wahid, bands that were successful. She kind of got inspired by the whole idea of a career in rock and roll. You know, she'd see Ian McCulloch walking down Bold Street in his overcoat, and then the next week he'd be on the front of the NME. So it made her realize that being involved and in music was, you know, there was no obstacle. You didn't need, you know, it wasn't about playing big stadiums or, you know, living in a big house, or it wasn't about, you know, Fleetwood Mac or whatever. It was something much more possible. So after her 6 months, she went back. I mean, she did visit Liverpool again quite soon after, but after her first visit, she she just absolutely focused on the way to get all the shit out of her head was to follow a career in rock and roll. So it was like a life-changing experience for her.
What did the people you interviewed say she were like at that time?
Loud, brunette most of the time, very into music. I actually found out she went twice to the Hacienda.
Oh,
Uh,
really?
she went when Julian Cope and Teardrop Explodes played at an event called Club Zoo at the Hacienda, and she was there the night Ian McCulloch, Ian McCulloch and the rest of Echo and the Bunnymen played. They were both middle of 1982.
Yeah.
She travelled over from Liverpool in their minibus, in their van. So, you know, she was, as I say in the book, she was really, really into her music. Because she was a woman, she was labelled a groupie. If she'd been a man, she'd have been talked about as, you know, she's like, you know, one of us. She's in our gang. He's in our gang, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because when boys are really into music and hanging around bands, they're kind of embraced as being, you know, in the gang. But for her, I think she got very unfairly labelled.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, anyway, she read the book and emailed me to tell me I was a genius.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah. But then she stopped talking to me.
What was that? All you heard from her?
Not gonna, yeah. So, well, I kind of know all the reasons, but I've told you enough. I've confessed enough to you.
the next, the next book is Life After Dark: A History of British Nightclubs and Music Venues.
That's a big 500-page history of music venues and nightclubs. It kind of goes back, you know, a couple of 100 years. It talks about the importance of nightlife to industrial cities like Manchester, but it's right around the country, and where and all and a kind of chart where all the venues were that were central to various scenes as they developed. You know, the jazz scene, the mod scene, hippies. So in each era, I write about different clubs, how they were founded, who played there. So it's like a history of music, but told through the spaces where music happened. Um, but also it's kind of like a social history, because then you have, uh, you know, a lot of the venues and the music are kind of products of bigger social change. So, for example, in the 20s, a lot of the uh, big clubs like the Ritz in Manchester, for example, were actually quite female dominated because so many men had been killed in the First World War. So even though back then, you dance with a partner, it was quite usual for women to dance with other women because there weren't enough men around. So in every era, there's a kind of reason why stuff is happening. Beginning of the 60s, teenagers have got money, full employment, austerity ended. Rationing had ended. Um, National service had ended. So it's a period when teenagers really had freedom. So a whole load of little clubs opened everywhere. There were more clubs around in Manchester in 1965 than there were any time probably in its history, because the kids had a bit of money, and they were all forming bands. So it's a very in-depth book. And the interesting thing is it came out just a couple of years before lockdown, and when venues were closing in lockdown and when people suddenly couldn't go out, people realized how much cities relied on venues and how much people relied on being able to go out, and how in some ways obviously very frustrating that was for people, and a whole part of their lives were lost. So actually they became more interested in the book because everyone was like, this is what we were missing. This is why nightlife is so important, because it's something that's been done for generation after generation. And suddenly, even during the Second World War, a lot of clubs were still open. So it was almost like the first time for 200 years that people couldn't go out, listen to music, dance, get off with each other, have a good time, escape from daily life. Suddenly they couldn't do it, and we all realized what we'd been missing. And so the book kind of reinforces that by talking about all those experiences.
Yeah, well, the next book I've got down here is A Life in 35 Boxes.
That's another one of the small format books. The small format books I would take about 3 or 4 hours to read maximum. It's quite a popular format because they're not too bulky to carry around with you, and you can read them on a relatively long train journey, or if you're taking an aeroplane somewhere, or if you've got a busy life and you haven't got enough time to really get into a huge book. And so that one is about why and how I sold my vinyl record collection. And it's not as tragic a story as it sounds. It's literally called How I Survived, the subtitle, How I Survived Selling My Record Collection. So it's kind of quite a deep book, really. And I don't denigrate anyone who collects vinyl, but I just talk about how I almost wake up one day and think I've lost my emotional connection to all this plastic. And what am I going to do? Am I going to keep it all? It kind of weighed me down almost literally and psychologically, in the sense that it represented my past history. And I felt like I was getting to an age where I didn't want to be looking back all the time, and I had all this baggage from the past, which was somehow represented by this massive record collection. So I sold it to another DJ, a guy called Seth Troxler, a big DJ called Seth Troxler, because he understood its he understood the whole content really of the collection, and some of it was rare stuff, a lot of it wasn't, but it kind of represented all those years of work for me. And he plays it. So when he does vinyl sets, half the records he takes are records he's bought off me. So sometimes he's playing a set in Argentina or somewhere, and he posts on Instagram. He's holding up one of my records. So I think that's quite a cute way for them to end. For me to pass on. I think you get to a point in your life where you just want to pass stuff on to people who might appreciate it. It's
Yeah,
not
yeah.
about collecting more and more and more, or pulling up the ladder so no one else can follow you in your footsteps. I'm not like that. I'm much more like, I want to empower people. I want to give people ideas or inspiration. And in that case, it was like, it was the records going to somebody in his early 30s, rather than being sat in a cellar, waiting to be put in a skip,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
2 days after my funeral at some point. I mean, that isn't a good end for anyone, really. So, anyway, so yeah, the book is quite heavy, to be honest, in that way.
well, I've got another one of your short stories. How many did you say there was? Seven, and there's eight in April.
Yeah,
Yeah, the next one is the Pablo Picasso one.
yeah. Well, that's the most recent one, and that is about Picasso's Paris nightlife. Because as you can tell, I'm a real, I've quite a utopian view of nightlife. I think that nightlife and clubs and venues, it's not just about the music. It's about the social aspect, the way that communities develop, the way that people can have their individual lives changed. The commerciality of them is not really the most important thing about them. And I kind of test my theory by going back to Paris in the early 1900s and researching where Picasso used to hang out, and try and paint a picture of the kind of venues that he would hang out in Paris in that era, but also talk about how stuff happening at night influenced him as an artist. Things that the first painting he did when he arrived in Paris from Spain was a nightclub. And later in his career, certain things connected with life after dark appear regularly in his paintings, guitars, bottles of wine. So that was a fascinating book to research, and obviously gave me the excuse to go and hang out in Paris a lot and wander the streets, trying to find where all these dives were that Picasso went to with various dodgy friends and dodgy women. And of course, they're all now supermarkets, or apartments. But one or two of them were still knocking around. So it was quite really interesting book to research and to write.
You enjoy that part of writing a book, the research part?
I love the research. Yeah, I mean, my books, once I've done the research and I've written all the notes about all the stuff I've researched, are normally 3 times longer than the book needs to be. So a lot of time I spend when I write books is having to take stuff out. um, but I don't begrudge the fact I might have spent a week researching something that doesn't even end up in the book, because I just enjoy the experience. Yeah, in book I enjoy the research, and I enjoy the book coming out and me doing book events and talking about the book and meeting readers. So every time one of my books comes out, I always do 12, 15, 20 events. pub function rooms, little theatres, whatever. Yeah, because I just enjoy sharing what I've researched with other people.
Well, the next one and the last one I've got on the list is Adventures on the Wheels of Steel.
Well, that was a book I wrote in 2001 and 2. And that was about the rise of superstar DJs. So that involved me uh, hanging out. I hung out with Fatboy Slim in Nottingham one night. He was playing there, and interviewed him in his lovely 5-star hotel at 4 in the morning, and interviewing Norman Jay. Yeah, a number of DJs, but each one kind of representing a different part of music. Interviewed a Northern Soul DJ, for example, or a few of them. Yeah, so that was about the DJing phenomenon, because obviously from, as I said much earlier, being a club DJ wasn't a massive thing in the mid-80s, or certainly nothing like it was by the end of the 90s. So the book is like, how did it grow so big? How did DJing become have such a status in music? So that was, I mean, it's over 20 years ago now, and but it's still, the history of all that really fascinates me. Yeah, the why and the how.
Yeah, yeah. Back to your DJing. You've toured with the Stone Roses. You've played after parties for people like for bands like New Order and stuff. What are them experiences like?
Um, yeah, I mean, I mean, I enjoy doing stuff like that. I quite enjoy uh, warming up for bands or playing after bands. I quite like that. In some ways, I prefer it to playing with other DJs. Um, I mean, I'm not. Uh, I think at the moment, one of the things I like about all that is the traveling.
Yeah,
Playing different places, um, and um, playing to different crowds. And you never literally never know what the night's going to be like. Um, I mean, playing with the Stone Roses, and then I did a few gigs warming up for Ian Brown on his Golden Greats tour, which was fantastic, which is a great album.
yeah,
And yeah, I quite like the little challenge of, the band's coming on at whatever 9, okay, but you also know that sometimes bands can be a bit late. They're never early. Do you know what I mean? You never get a call from the stage manager, right? Ian's ready to go on now, and it's only 8:45. But if you want to fade out, the Roses are coming on. It's never like that. It's either 9 is when they say 9, it means somewhere between 9 and 9:30, basically.
yeah,
So then but if you're taking your job seriously and you really want things to work, you want to build the atmosphere so that the moment the stage manager says, right, 2 minutes, which again normally means 5, but anyway, you've whipped the crowd up into some kind of a frenzy, So when the band come on, the crowd are just absolutely ready to hear them.
yeah, yeah,
Uh, and because if you do that, if you don't do that, then you might as well just put on a Rod Stewart CD and everyone sit on the floor and drink cider. You know what I mean? You've
yeah,
got to try and create an atmosphere. That's what you're there for. And I quite like that, that sort of that final half an hour, like, are they coming on? What am I going to play? What's going to be next? And then, if you're lucky, you just get it right. And I remember one time on Ian's solo tour, uh, putting on "Fight the Power" by Public Enemy,
Yeah, yeah.
and he just walked on stage and he's just like fucking perfect, fucking perfect. He said, and he was literally bouncing on his toes. You know, he was like, it was almost like the boxer going into the boxing ring, you know, and the music was just exactly what he didn't tell me to play. That was just my kind of instinct, and you know, and so you're just putting the artist in the right place and the audience
Yeah, is there a gig that you've done that stands out to you?
in that way. Well, that one does. I mean, I'm telling you now, I think maybe I just completely overthink it. It doesn't really matter what I'm playing. I could be playing Tainted Love by Soft Cell or whatever, anything. But there's a part of me that doesn't really mind overthinking it. I'd rather overthink it than wing it or take that kind of job really lightly,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
Well, all those. I did a party for in Turin for New Order, but they didn't want to do an after party. The gig was on a Saturday. They wanted to do a night out the night before, not like a late night, but they wanted like a pre-party because after doing the gig, I think they just would want to just like, you know, go sit backstage, you know, collect their thoughts, get back to the hotel, have a shower, you know, get to bed. They weren't like, they weren't going to be in the mood to party all night
Yeah.
after playing for 2 hours. So we arranged, and the night before, a pre-party. So we sort of had a party with kind of invited guests, people who were running the gig, and some of the press, and all the band came. And it was kind of low key, but it was in a really lovely venue, an old 17th century Italian mansion. And yeah, just a really good vibe, basically. Really lovely. And one of those where um, yeah, I remember at the end of my set, they were still having a drink and it was raining outside. And I went up to Bernard and New Order's manager, Rebecca, and they said, "Oh, you're going to hang out?" And I said, "Oh, I think I'll get back to the hotel." And they said, "You do know it's raining." Uh, and I said, "Oh, I don't really mind about that. I like walking in the rain just to get wet on purpose." And they were just like, "Well, fuck off then." That was a good moment,
Yeah,
quoting
yeah.
his lyrics back at him.
You DJ'd at Spike Island and Blackpool for Stone Roses. What them two gigs like?
Blackpool was amazing. Um, Obviously, it was just at a time when the Roses were massive cult heroes. So the audience, because I DJ'd with them, uh, they played a big gig the year before at the Hacienda, and then they did Blackpool, and then they did Alexandra Palace, and they did the Spike Island. Um, so I kind of saw the lift off really, where it just went huge, and Blackpool was just at that moment where it was going to move from being a cult band to being, yeah, what one of the most talked about bands in the world.
Yeah,
So it was very kind of really exciting moment. Uh, Whereas with Spike Island, there were I think various things wrong with the sound, and and they'd made it, so there wasn't quite that edge that you get when uh, bands are really still hungry and a bit undiscovered, which is kind of always a really good time in someone's career.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, Blackpool was great. I mean, the audience were, uh, I mean, they were just so enthusiastic, incredibly. I mean, it was one of them where uh, the audience knew that they were going to remember that night for the rest of their lives
Yeah, yeah.
before before the doors had even opened, because it was just the right band at the right time on a sunny day in Blackpool. And it was a very young crowd. So it wasn't people, oh, they're not as good as, the Smiths or I Saw Joy Division. It wasn't that kind of an audience who would maybe stand at the back and complain that the Stone Roses sounded like the Byrds or something. It was just kids, very young. I mean, I'm roughly the same age as Ian and John. And I would say the audience, even at that point, probably 5 years younger than us,
Really, yeah.
maybe more. Um, and it was their band. Every generation is like, this is our band.
Yeah, yeah.
And so everything just felt absolutely right at that gig, Blackpool.
I've heard Ian Brown say before that was the first time he saw loads of the crowd in like bucket hats and that money t-shirt and stuff, and like he knew it were gonna get big.
Yeah. Because honestly, I think the band were excited as well. I mean, John is actually obviously quite a laid back, low key kind of a guy. Ian's sometimes quite hard to read as a person, but I mean, Man is always very up. He's a very good guy to hang around with. Rennie's a bit enigmatic, but uh, and then they had Cressa, of course, at the same at Blackpool as well, kind of in the crew. But you could see that they were really looking forward to the gig, and they absolutely loved it from moment zero. Whereas I think Alexandra Palace, the next gig on that rise, I don't think they enjoyed it, and you could tell, again, for various reasons. And then Spike Island was just a bit bewildering, really, because it was so huge and it was outdoor, and we'd all loved music and we loved going to gigs. Um, but back then, 1990, Spike Island, Glastonbury hadn't kind of reinvented itself. The only open air gigs were like Reading and
Yeah.
Castle Donington Heavy Metal Festival. But we were sort of basement venue, dark basement venue, sweat dripping off the wall type people. And then suddenly there were like 25,000 people in a massive field outside Widnes. And I think we all couldn't quite acclimatise ourselves to that.
Yeah.
But for various reasons, I don't think it quite worked. But Blackpool was sensational, amazing.
Did you get stuck on stage when they came on at Blackpool?
Yeah, that was like an accident, really, because they put the DJ box behind John's amp, uh, and there wasn't really room for me to. And obviously, I did DJ, literally. Again, it was one of those moments trying to play get the right final record. I think I played "Sympathy for the Devil" by the Rolling Stones, and which is it's like 5 minutes long, and it's kind of got a really good vibe. Um, and also, me being me, I knew that the Rolling Stones had played at that venue in the '60s, and there'd been a massive riot where like thousands of Scottish lads pissed up on holiday trashed the whole venue. So I was summoning up the spirit of that moment by playing "Sympathy for the Devil." But anyway, and then the band came on stage and were kind of plugging in their things as the record was still playing, because they needed to, as soon as the record was going to finish or they were ready, Manny was going to go do 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 do, and "I Want to Be Adored" was going to start, so there couldn't be like a gap. And then just as I kind of got the nod and I realized I needed to fade out, and Manny was about to start, I realized I had no way out, because I was kind of pinned between the decks, and John's amp, and also I think Cressa was just in front of me as well. So I thought, well, I don't. And there was a film being made of it, which I knew. Uh, so I basically just had to take a few steps back and stand right at the back of the stage in the shadows. And it was a great vantage point, obviously, but it wasn't meant to happen. But, not all good things were meant to happen. Things are
No, no,
unpredictable.
exactly.
You got to embrace it.
Did you have to stay there the whole gig then? Did you not get off at all?
Well, why would I want to?
Well, yeah, true. Good point.
I like to say it was a happy accident.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Because if I'd said to them, "Oh, can I stand at the back of the stage for the set?" They'd be like, "No." you're just,
I've just got.
you're just the You'd be like, "You're just the DJ. Get off."
Thank you for coming on, Dave. I'm on to my last question now. If there is one tune to sum up your life, what would it be?
Sorry, one what?
One song or one any tune?
Uh, oh my God, so many. I'm trying not to overthink it. I mean, honestly, I don't know if it's your bag, but on the right night, to the right audience, Ain't Nobody by Rufus Chaka Khan is just the most wonderful record to drop and listen to and share with the crowd.
Yeah,
I mean, there's lots of when I'm in, I tend to have kind of different kind of music that I like for all kind of mood. I listen to music all day. I wouldn't listen to Ain't Nobody all day, but at the right time, it's like just like the perfect record.
yeah. Well, thank you for that. Then we're finished now. So thank you for coming on twice. I appreciate it.
Right, cheers.